In the vast expanse of the galaxy, humans were regarded as little more than a curiosity, primitive, insignificant in the eyes of the more advanced species that populated the stars. Among these superior beings were the Aseri, a race known not only for their ethereal beauty and sensuality but also for their unmatched telepathic abilities and sophisticated technology. They ruled their world with a quiet arrogance, believing themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution, far above the struggling races that littered the galaxy. Ethan, a young human scientist, found himself at the forefront of a deep space exploration mission, a mission that had once filled him with excitement and a sense of purpose. The stars held mysteries, and Ethan had always been driven by the desire to unravel them. But his ambition led him down a path he could never have anticipated. During what should have been a routine survey, his ship was ambushed. The Aseri, in their sleek, almost invisible craft, captured Ethan with little effort, their superior technology rendering his attempts at resistance futile. The moment Ethan regained consciousness in the cold, sterile confines of an Aseri research facility, he was overwhelmed by a sense of dread. The sterile white walls, the clinical atmosphere, and the icy stares of his captors sent a chill down his spine. To them, he was just another specimen, a mere human plucked from the vastness of space for their amusement and study. The Aseri's condescension was palpable, their telepathic whispers brushing against his mind, probing and prodding as if he were some exotic creature brought in from the wild. He could feel their disdain, their quiet laughter at his expense. He was alone, far from Earth, trapped in the clutches of beings who saw him as little more than a plaything. Among the Aseri who observed him was Nyx, a young scientist whose curiosity often bordered on obsession. Her interest in Ethan was not unique among her kind. Humans, after all, were a relatively new addition to the galaxy's roster of sentient beings, and the Aseri prided themselves on understanding all forms of life. But there was something about Ethan that drew Nyx in, a spark of defiance in his eyes, a resilience that intrigued her despite herself. Initially, she approached him as she would any other subject of study, with cold detachment and professional curiosity. Yet, the more time she spent observing him, the more she found herself lingering, drawn to the emotions that simmered just beneath his surface. Nyx decided that Ethan would be her next experiment. She wanted to delve deep into human emotions, to understand how such an inferior species could possess such a rich tapestry of feelings. She began with simple telepathic interactions, gently probing his mind, feeling out his thoughts, his fears, and his memories. Ethan resisted at first, his mind recoiling from the invasive touch of Nyx's telepathy. But Nyx was persistent, her interest in him growing with each passing day. As the experiments progressed, something unexpected began to happen. Nyx, who had always maintained a professional distance from her subjects, found herself growing increasingly fascinated by Ethan, not just as a subject, but as an individual. His emotions were raw, powerful, unlike anything she had ever experienced before. There was a depth to his feelings that stirred something within her, something she couldn't quite understand. Ethan, on the other hand, felt the strange connection as well. Despite the fear and anger that burned within him, there was a part of him that couldn't help but be intrigued by Nyx. She was different from the other Aseri. Her touch was gentler, her telepathic presence softer, almost caring. It was confusing, infuriating even, but there was no denying that a bond was forming between them, an invisible thread that pulled them closer together with each passing moment. As Nyx delved deeper into Ethan's mind, she began to feel something she had never felt before, a powerful, almost overwhelming attraction. It was not just physical, though Ethan's human form was certainly exotic to her. It was something far more profound, something that went beyond mere lust. She felt drawn to him in a way that defied logic, a connection that seemed to transcend the boundaries of their species. Nyx struggled to understand what was happening to her. She was Aseri, a member of the most advanced species in the galaxy, and yet here she was, inexplicably drawn to a human, a being her people considered barely sentient. It made no sense, and yet the pull was undeniable. The more she tried to resist it, the stronger it became, until she found herself thinking about Ethan even when she was not in the lab, her mind consumed by thoughts of him. The experiments continued, but they began to take on a new dimension. Nyx was no longer just studying Ethan, she was trying to understand herself, to make sense of the emotions that were rapidly spiraling out of control. She found herself drawn to his presence, craving the connection they shared during their telepathic sessions. And it wasn't just her mind that was affected, her body responded to him as well, a fact that both excited and terrified her. Ethan sensed the change in Nyx as well. The once cold, clinical scientist was now warmer, more open, her telepathic touch no longer invasive but inviting. He could feel her emotions bleeding into his own, her desire, her confusion, her longing. It was as if their minds were beginning to merge, their thoughts intertwining in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Nyx found herself spending more time with Ethan than she had initially planned. What started as a clinical interest had evolved into something far more complex. Their interactions, once formal and detached, now carried an undercurrent of emotion that neither of them could ignore. As they continued to communicate telepathically, Nyx was no longer just observing Ethan, she was experiencing his emotions, his thoughts, his very essence. This connection was unlike anything Nyx had ever felt. Through their telepathic link, she could feel the depth of Ethan's emotions, the fear, the hope, the anger, and the longing. These were emotions that, despite her advanced telepathy, Nyx had never truly understood in such raw form. She could sense his memories, see fragments of his life on Earth, and with each shared thought she felt herself being drawn deeper into his world. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and utterly consuming. Ethan, too, was affected by this bond. Despite the circumstances of his captivity, he found solace in the connection he shared with Nyx. Her presence in his mind, once invasive and unwelcome, had become a source of comfort. He could sense her curiosity, her confusion, and, beneath it all, a growing affection that mirrored his own. It was as if they were two sides of the same coin, bound together by forces neither of them fully understood. Then, during one particularly intense session, something extraordinary happened. As their minds intertwined, a surge of energy pulsed through the room. The lab's lights flickered, equipment short-circuited, and a wave of raw power radiated from the center of their connection. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, the energy dissipated, leaving the lab in darkness and Nyx and Ethan breathless. Nyx was shaken by the experience. She had never encountered anything like it before. At first, she dismissed it as a fluke, a strange side effect of their telepathic link, but the memory of that surge of power lingered in her mind. There was something more to it, something deeper, something ancient. The thought both intrigued and terrified her. Determined to understand what had happened, Nyx began to research the history of the Aseri's telepathic abilities. What she found was startling. Buried deep within the archives, in texts long forgotten by her people, were references to an ancient power, one that had been dormant for millennia. This power, it was said, was linked to the Aseri's emotional connections, a force that could be awakened by a bond of extraordinary intensity. The more she read, the more Nyx realized that the energy burst she and Ethan had experienced was no accident. It was the awakening of this ancient power, a power that had lain dormant within her people for generations. But this realization brought with it a new fear. If the Aseri leadership discovered what she had unleashed, they would see Ethan as a threat, an outsider who had somehow tapped into their most sacred and dangerous power. Nyx knew her superiors well. They were cautious, secretive, and above all, protective of their people. If they believed that Ethan could control or influence this power, they would do whatever it took to neutralize him, even if it meant destroying him. Nyx's superiors were already growing suspicious. The energy surge had not gone unnoticed, and the unusual events surrounding her experiments had raised eyebrows among the Aseri leadership. They began to question her more frequently, probing for details, seeking to understand what was happening in her lab. Nyx could feel the pressure mounting, the walls closing in around her. She was walking a tightrope, balancing her duty to her people with her growing feelings for Ethan and the fear of what might happen if the truth were revealed. Nyx knew she had to be careful. She continued her experiments with Ethan, but now with a new sense of urgency. She needed to understand the full extent of their connection, to determine whether they could control the power they had awakened or if it would spiral out of control. Each session was a delicate dance, a careful balance between exploration and restraint. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, and with it, the power they shared became more potent, more dangerous. As the pressure from her superiors intensified, Nyx found herself at a crossroads. She could not ignore the connection she felt with Ethan, nor could she deny the danger they both faced. The Asari leadership would not hesitate to act if they believed Ethan posed a threat, and Nyx was painfully aware that she was running out of time. She had to make a choice: betray her people to protect the man she had come to care for, or sever the bond that had become the most significant part of her life. The stakes had never been higher. The power they had unleashed was growing, and with it, the potential for both great destruction and unimaginable change. Nyx and Ethan were bound together by forces they could barely comprehend, and as the tension between them and the Asari leadership reached a breaking point, it became clear that their journey was only just beginning. The ancient power they had awakened was not something that could be easily contained, and the consequences of their bond would soon ripple across the galaxy, challenging everything they had ever known. Nyx found herself trapped between two irreconcilable forces: her growing affection for Ethan and her unwavering loyalty to her people. The connection she shared with Ethan was undeniable, and it had brought forth a side of her she had never known existed. But with it came a profound internal conflict. The Asari had always believed in their superiority, a belief deeply ingrained in their culture and identity. Their telepathic abilities, their advanced technology, their seemingly eternal wisdom, all of these had made them feel invincible, beyond reproach. But now, everything Nyx had been taught to believe was in question. Her bond with Ethan, a human, a being her people deemed lesser, had awakened something ancient and powerful, something that defied the Asari's understanding of themselves. Nyx could feel the weight of this revelation pressing down on her, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths. Could it be that the Asari were not as superior as they believed? Could it be that they had misunderstood their own power, and that a human could hold the key to unlocking its true potential? These thoughts haunted Nyx, even as she continued her experiments with Ethan. She was no longer just a scientist, she was a participant in something far greater, something that could change the course of history. And yet, with every passing day, the pressure from her superiors grew more intense. The leadership was not blind to the unusual events surrounding her work. They were beginning to sense that something was amiss, that Nyx was hiding something from them. The Asari leadership, ever vigilant and cautious, decided it was time to intervene. They could not afford to let this situation spiral out of control. The power that Nyx and Ethan had awakened was too dangerous, too unpredictable. If left unchecked, it could threaten the very stability of the galaxy. The leadership's plan was simple and ruthless: capture Ethan, study him, and if necessary, eliminate him to prevent the power from spreading. Nyx knew what was coming. She could sense the growing suspicion in the minds of her superiors, the way they began to close ranks, preparing to act. The thought of losing Ethan, of seeing him subjected to the cold, calculating experiments of the Asari leadership, filled her with dread. She had seen what her people were capable of when they felt threatened, and she knew that Ethan would not survive their scrutiny. But more than that, she knew she could not let them destroy what they had awakened together. The bond they shared was too precious, too vital to be snuffed out by fear and ignorance. Faced with an impossible choice, Nyx made a decision that would change her life forever. She chose to betray her people to save Ethan. It was a decision born of desperation, of love, and of a newfound understanding of what truly mattered. She could no longer stand by and watch as the Asari leadership moved to destroy the man she had come to care for, the man who had shown her that there was more to life, more to power, than she had ever imagined. Using her telepathic abilities, Nyx began to deceive the Asari forces, creating false trails and misdirecting their efforts. She carefully orchestrated their escape, every move calculated, every risk weighed. It was a dangerous game, and she knew that if she was caught, the consequences would be dire. But Nyx was determined, driven by a resolve she had never felt before. The night they fled the planet, the tension was palpable. Every step was fraught with danger, every shadow a potential threat. But Nix and Ethan moved with purpose, their minds linked, their hearts in sync. They knew they were being pursued, that the Asari leadership would stop at nothing to capture them. But they also knew that together, they stood a chance. A slim chance, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. As they left the planet behind, the chase began in earnest. Word of their escape spread quickly, and it wasn't long before both Asari forces and human factions were on their trail. The galaxy became a battleground, with Nix and Ethan caught in the middle, running from enemies on all sides. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, their connection deepening as they evaded capture time and again. But the pressure was immense, the stakes higher than ever. Their journey was filled with moments of quiet reflection, where they could feel the weight of what they were fighting for, their connection, their shared destiny, the ancient power that had brought them together. But these moments were fleeting, always overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of their enemies. Every star system they passed through, every planet they touched down on, brought new dangers, new challenges. Yet through it all, Nix and Ethan grew closer. The shared experience of running for their lives, of defying the odds, forged an unbreakable bond between them. They were no longer just a scientist and her subject, no longer an Asari and a human. They were something more, something that transcended the boundaries of race and species. They were partners, allies, lovers bound together by fate and by a power they could barely comprehend. But as the chase continued, Nix knew that their time was running out. The Asari forces were closing in, and the human factions were becoming more desperate. The galaxy was a vast place, but even the vastness of space could not protect them forever. They would have to make a stand, to face the consequences of their choices and to fight for the bond they had forged. The struggle for control had only just begun, and Nix knew that the hardest battles were yet to come. But she also knew that she would face them with Ethan by her side, no matter what the future held. Their bond was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, and in the end, it would be the one thing that could save them both. Nix and Ethan, weary from their relentless flight across the galaxy, found themselves on a distant, uncharted planet, a place so remote it had escaped the attention of the galaxy's great powers. It was here, amidst the desolate landscape, that they stumbled upon the ruins, ancient structures buried in the sands of time, remnants of a civilization long forgotten. These ruins held secrets, answers to questions that had haunted Nix since the moment their bond had awakened something deep within her. As they explored the ruins, the truth began to reveal itself. Etched into the walls, in a language both familiar and alien, were the stories of a power that had once shaped the very fabric of the galaxy. This was no ordinary power. It was a force that predated both the Asari and humanity, a force that had the potential to unify or destroy entire civilizations. The more they uncovered, the more Nix and Ethan realized that their connection was not just a random occurrence but a catalyst, a key that had unlocked something ancient and profound. The revelation was staggering. This power, hidden away for millennia, had been dormant, waiting for the right conditions to resurface. It was linked to the deepest emotions, to the bonds that could form between beings who were truly connected. Nix understood now that their bond was more than just a connection between two individuals. It was the very thing that had awakened this force. It was both a gift and a curse, something that could bring about great change or unimaginable destruction. The implications of this discovery were immense. If this power fell into the wrong hands, it could be used to control the galaxy, to bend entire races to the will of a single entity. Nix and Ethan were suddenly aware of the gravity of their situation. They were no longer just fugitives on the run. They were the keepers of a secret that could alter the fate of the galaxy. And this secret made them the most hunted beings in existence. Word of the ancient force began to spread, faster than Nix and Ethan could have anticipated. Various factions, each with their own agendas, started to mobilize. The Asari leadership, once cautious, became desperate, their fear of the unknown driving them to take drastic measures. Human factions, too, saw the potential in this power, viewing it as a means to finally gain the upper hand in a galaxy that had long dismissed them. The galaxy was on the brink of war, with Nix and Ethan caught in the eye of the storm. As the conflict escalated, the pressure on Nix and Ethan grew unbearable. They could feel the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressing down on them, the fear, the greed, the desperation of those who sought to control the power they had unleashed. Their bond, once a source of strength, now felt like a chain, binding them to a fate they had never asked for. They were forced to make impossible choices, to navigate a world where every decision could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. But the most difficult decision lay ahead. Nix and Ethan knew that they could not run forever. The power they had awakened was too great, too volatile to be left unchecked. They understood that they had two options: sacrifice their bond, sealing the power away forever, or risk unleashing it in the hope that it could bring peace to a galaxy on the brink of destruction. It was a heart-wrenching choice, one that would test the very limits of their love and their resolve. The thought of losing what they had was unbearable. Their bond had become the most precious thing in their lives, a connection that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. But they also knew that the stakes were too high to ignore. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos, and their bond was the only thing that could tip the balance one way or the other. As they stood in the heart of the ancient ruins, surrounded by the echoes of a forgotten civilization, Nix and Ethan faced the hardest decision of their lives. The power that had brought them together could also tear them apart, and they had to decide whether to protect what they had or to sacrifice it for the greater good. It was a choice that would define not only their future but the future of the entire galaxy. In that moment, as the winds of fate swirled around them, they leaned towards a decision, one that would change everything. The pain of that choice was palpable, a knife that cut deep into their souls. But they knew that whatever they decided, they would face it together, bound by the love and the power that had brought them to this point. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for their next move. Nix and Ethan, their bond now known to every corner of the galaxy, found themselves surrounded on the ancient planet where it all began. The once forgotten ruins had become the epicenter of a conflict that had drawn the most powerful factions in the galaxy to its desolate surface. The Asari forces, driven by fear of the unknown, and the human factions, eager to harness the power for their own ends, converged on the location, leaving Nix and Ethan with no place to run. The tension was suffocating. The planet's atmosphere crackled with the anticipation of battle, the weight of destiny pressing down on Nix and Ethan as they prepared for what they knew would be their last stand. They had been pushed to the brink, their bond tested in ways they had never imagined, and now they stood together, ready to face the consequences of the power they had unleashed. As the forces clashed around them, it became clear that this confrontation was about more than just control of the ancient power. It was a battle for the very soul of the galaxy, a struggle between those who sought to dominate and those who sought to protect. In the chaos, Nix and Ethan fought not just for their survival, but for the future of every sentient being in the galaxy. Their connection, once a source of solace, now felt like a lifeline, holding them together as the world around them descended into violence. But deep down, they both knew the truth. The power they had awakened was too great, too dangerous to be controlled by any one faction. The only way to ensure that it would not be used to wreak havoc across the stars was to sacrifice the bond that had brought it to life. It was a decision that neither of them wanted to make, but they understood that it was the only way to save the galaxy from itself. In the midst of the battle, as the forces of the Asari and humanity tore each other apart, Nix and Ethan made the hardest decision of their lives. They would have to give up the bond that had become their lifeline, the connection that had brought them together in ways they could never have anticipated. It was a sacrifice that would change them forever, but it was a sacrifice that had to be made. With a heavy heart, Nix reached out to Ethan one last time, their minds connecting in a final, desperate embrace. Together, they focused on the power that had brought them to this point, channeling it back into the ruins, into the ancient force that had lain dormant for so long. The energy that had once surged through them now began to dissipate, the raw, uncontrollable power fading as their bonds slowly unraveled. The world around them seemed to hold its breath as the force was sealed away, the ruins growing quiet as the power was contained once more. The battle that had raged so fiercely began to falter, the combatants realizing that the power they had fought so hard to control was slipping away from them. In that moment, As the last remnants of the ancient force faded into the ether, the galaxy was saved from the brink of destruction. But the cost was high. Nix and Ethan, once bound by a connection that transcended time and space, were left standing alone, their bond severed, the power that had united them now gone. The emotional toll was overwhelming, the pain of their sacrifice etched into their very souls. They had saved the galaxy, but in doing so, they had lost the most precious thing they had, each other. As the dust settled and the forces of the galaxy began to withdraw, the aftermath of their decision became clear. The galaxy, once on the brink of war, began to recover, the threat of the ancient power now a distant memory. Nyx returned to her people, forever changed by what she had experienced. She was no longer the same Asari who had once viewed humanity as inferior, but someone who understood the value of connection, of sacrifice, of love. Ethan, too, returned to his people, hailed as a hero for his role in saving the galaxy. But the victory was bittersweet, the memory of what he and Nyx had shared lingering in his mind. He had seen the best and worst of what the galaxy had to offer, and he had played a part in shaping its future. But he knew that the bond they had shared would never be forgotten, even if it was now just a memory. The story of Nyx and Ethan's sacrifice spread across the stars, becoming a symbol of hope, of unity, of the potential for understanding between species. It served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the possibility of a better future, of a galaxy united not by power, but by the bonds that connected all sentient beings. In the end, their sacrifice was not in vain. The galaxy was left with a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to move forward together, to build a future that honored the legacy of those who had fought to save it. And while Nyx and Ethan would go their separate ways, their story would continue to inspire generations to come, a testament to the power of love, of sacrifice, and of the enduring hope for a better tomorrow.